Hello, everybody. This is Dooster with Cryptids and Critters Paranormal. I've got another little paranormal experience I want to share with you. This experience happened several years ago in an old rental house that my wife and I were renting. And we called the old place the Ponderosa. And so that's a fitting name for this story, the Ponderosa. It is a true story. The old wooden clapboard house on the corner of Homer Warsham and Roy Cole Road had been there for many, many years, nestled among the towering oak trees. Just exactly how long, I have no idea, but if I had to guess, I'd say it was probably built sometime in the early 1900s. Most of the original white paint had peeled off and flaked over the years, causing it to appear more like a mottled gray than a white. The steep tin roof showed more rust than tin, and the front porch floorboards had seen much better days. During its long lifespan, the house had undoubtedly experienced both good times and bad times. It had probably witnessed more than its share of birth and death events of those who chose to make it their home over the years. Such was the case of Aunt Annie. She and her husband, Davis, along with her grandson, Billy, had lived in this house for as long as I could remember. Oh, I'm sure they had lived other places, but as far as my memory can stretch, they had lived on that corner at the intersection of the two gravel roads for as long as I could remember. The house was typical of most farmhouses built in that era. It basically consisted of 3 large rooms, namely the kitchen, a living room, and a master bedroom, plus a smaller bedroom that connected to the larger covered back porch that allowed easy entry into the kitchen through a side door. Oh yeah, and a full-size attic that was accessed by a hidden stairway in the wall in the master bedroom. Annie used the attic to store her quilting materials, canning jars, and other assorted junk. The well was situated just outside the kitchen, and a hand pump near the sink was used to draw water for drinking, cooking, and washing. The old outhouse sat several yards out behind the house, between the hen house and the hog pen. Annie was quite a character, and she had the nasty habit of dipping snuff. She kept a pinch between her lower lip and gum, and usually had the resulting brown stains that started at the corner of her mouth and extended down onto her chin. She could purse her lips and spit across the room into a spittoon. Sometimes she hit it, sometimes she didn't. Like I said, it was a nasty habit. She also loved to sing hymns, and hardly ever missed a church service. The only problem was she sang louder than anybody else and was usually way off key. Uncle Davis got up one morning and walked into the woods. He never returned. His body was found later that day lying back against a tree, the apparent victim of a heart attack. Annie went to bed one night and died in her sleep. Her body was discovered the following morning by her grandson, Billy. Annie was buried a couple of days later, and Billy went to live with Annie's sister. The old house sat empty for a couple of years, or at least it seemed to be empty to me. Driving in the country one day, my father-in-law spotted the old abandoned house and fell in love with it. And once he located the owner, convinced him to sell it to him. After some serious repairs and major remodeling, they moved into what they called the Ponderosa, and resided there for several years. Nothing extraordinarily happened during this time, or so I thought, except the temperature in the master bedroom seemed much colder than the rest of the house, especially the corner where Annie's bed once stood. The room was so cold it required extra heat during the winter, and in the summertime required little or no air conditioning. Later, my in-laws decided to move closer to town, and my wife and I rented the house from them and moved in with our 2 young daughters. We were in the process of building a home just down the road, and the close proximity worked out for the best. Well, maybe not the best. Actually, the place literally gave me the creeps. I had the constant fear of being watched, and it was the only place I ever lived where I was actually afraid to venture out of the house after dark. I had never had this feeling anywhere before, and since whatever was watching me seemed to be doing it from the old building out back. One fall night, my wife and I were in bed, and she woke me up stating she could hear someone singing. It was very faint, and you had to literally strain to hear it. To me, it sounded like Amazing Grace, and it seemed to be emanating from the attic. The next night, it was even louder, and it was not at all difficult to understand the words. It was definitely Amazing Grace, and it was definitely Annie's voice singing it. Off key as usual. I got up to investigate and found the corner bedroom was the only room where it could be heard anywhere in the house, and it was most certainly coming from the attic. As there was no light fixture in the attic, I decided to wait until daytime to check that out. I never mustered the courage to venture into the attic after that. I took the coward's way out. I called my father-in-law and asked if there had ever been anything, if they'd heard anything while they lived there, and his response nearly floored me. "So, you finally heard Annie, huh? We were wondering the other day when she was going to sing for you." He went on to state that they had heard the same singing from the attic many times, usually occurring in the early spring and again in the fall. And it was usually Amazing Grace they heard. I began to wonder if moving there had been a big mistake. At least he could have warned me. That night, the voice was even louder, and it steadily increased in volume throughout the remainder of the week. After reaching its peak, it began to decrease in volume and faded out completely over a period of 2 or 3 nights. The following spring, the singing commenced again, but this time it never quite reached the volume it had achieved the previous fall. It seemed much more distant and less forceful. We moved into our new home later that year, and I never heard from Annie again. However, the next family that rented the house had several unexplained experiences and complained of hearing voices from the attic. One couple actually moved out the following morning after they were entertained by a ghostly concert from the attic. The old house was demolished several years ago, and no evidence remains today that a house ever existed on the property. But I know it, and every time I pass by where it once stood, I still get that uneasy feeling of being watched, and I can't help but wonder if it's Annie. And that's my story on the Ponderosa. I hope you enjoyed it. If you will, subscribe to my channel, give me a like, and we will catch you later. Thank you for listening.